Well, I kind of sort of leaked the topic of this video on Facebook the other day, but I wanted to discuss this because it comes up from time to time, both from prospective students and then just talking with people online. Um, in the last video, we talked about self-defense or the streets. And the fact is that I try to tell people I don't teach self-defense. I just teach fighting. And what you learn in how to fist fight or how to fight with weapons, including potentially improvised weapons, may or may not serve you in a self-defense situation. So what I need to do is kind of go over why I don't actually consider what I do teaching self-defense. And there are two major reasons. And this should not be a long video. Number one is that self-defense is at this point a legal term. And being able to claim that you did something in self-defense means that you have to meet certain criteria legally to not get, criminally charged or civilly charged. One of the relevant concepts there also is the fact that in general, unsanctioned fighting is illegal. And so something that Mark McYoung says all the time is that when you claim self-defense, you are admitting to a crime, and then you have to be able to justify your actions to not get punished for that. And so it is not as simple as just, oh, I feared for my life. You actually have to make a case and demonstrate certain factors. So when I say I don't teach self-defense from a legal standpoint, is I'm not teaching law classes. I'm pretty much never teaching law class. I mean, we can have a conversation, but mostly I will point you to the works of McYoung and Rory Miller, and Randy King does good work there. There are some good authorities in the realm of actual self-defense from a legal and ethical standpoint. And yes, mostly in our case, we're talking to the US market. Every country is different, and within the US, every state is different. So the nuances are going to be very local, which is another reason that I can't really address self-defense unless I know the very precise situation that you're walking into. And I'm just generally not legally equipped to deal with that. So number one, why I don't teach self-defense is the fact that I'm not teaching law classes, and I'm not teaching you tactics to get through a legal justification. I'm literally teaching you how to fight. And you have to get to the point of, you have to get through situational awareness, situational preparedness, negotiation and de-escalation. You have to get through all of that before you can get to self-defense. And I'm not generally teaching the majority of that stuff, except in casual conversation after class or whatever. But for the most part, I am going to refer you to other people's works. And if we ever do have a self-defense class at the school, it will be because we are bringing in somebody who is, either a legal expert or an expert witness like McYoung or somebody like that, though I could never afford to bring Mark McYoung out. So that's number one, right? It's just a legal issue, and I'm teaching you how to fight. Two actually separate conversations there. Now, number two, and I actually think this is the more salient point, is the fact that for the most part, you don't actually need too much self-defense, because most fighting is avoidable, and most scenarios where self-defense is justifiable are not situations where martial arts training are going to help you that much. So we start getting into the realm of statistics, right? So I posted up something from the FBI, and I will put the links down below. There are 3 relevant links that I'm anticipating putting in the comments down below, and I will notate them best I can. But primarily, I'm looking at the FBI data because that is what is publicly available. And no, I don't trust the FBI any more than anybody else does. But it's the numbers I have to work with. So if you break it down by population, the FBI data has it that by 2019, because that's as far as the data I have goes, 366.7 incidents per 100,000 people, which works out to a 0.3% and change, right? I'm not going to do the math on screen for you. Less than 0.5%. Less than 0.5% of people being affected by violent crime. And that's violent crime in general. Violent crime in this case includes murder, robbery, aggravated assault, and rape. YouTube, don't do anything. I'm talking about this in a legal sense, right? Right, so those 4 criteria. Obviously, there are other crimes. And we know that a lot of crime goes unreported. How much? Well, we don't actually know. But I want you to think about that for a second. 0.36, 0.37%. That means 99.6, roughly, 99.6% safe any given day in the United States. That is huge, right? You are not walking out that door and getting into a fight. Now, a lot of crime goes unreported. Violence is not evenly distributed. And we have a few metrics that can actually help you avoid some of the worst situations, right? So let's take the first one. A lot of crime that goes unreported. Let's just be cynical and assume that 90% of crime goes unreported, that number is only 10%. If that number is only representing 10% of all violent crime, let's go ahead and multiply by 10. If we multiply by 10, right, that just shifts the decimal point 1 tick over, right? That puts us at 3.6 or 3.7%. So you'd still be 96% and change. 96% safe walking out your door. If that violent crime statistic is only 10% of the available, it's still 96 point whatever percent safe. Again, like, even if it is a fraction of the reported crime, you're still mostly safe. And the fact is, the trends are going down. We had a little spike in 2015, 2016. 2014 seems to be like the lowest year on record so far. But the overall trend is significantly down from the 90s, and there was a crime wave, in the late 80s and 90s. So, that's when helicopter parenting and stuff started. Look at Jonathan Haidt talking about that stuff, or Haidt. I don't know how to actually pronounce his name. And I've heard both. So the fact is that even if you adjust for some assumed greater percentage, you're still extremely safe, and the trend is going safer, not less safe. That's incredible. Now, like in the state that I live in Arizona, we are, we're definitely on the more violent side compared to other states. But if you look at absolute and by population numbers, both are important, right? You can't get stuck on just one or just the other. You actually have to look at both, because both are important. We're generally between like number 8 and number 12 on any of those 4 categories. So even being in the more violent area, there are states that either by absolute or by population are worse than us. So I was like, well, what's the worst one in the nation? Now, so technically speaking, DC is not a state. Washington, DC is not a state, nor should it be. But it gets put into the listing of states. They also include territories like Puerto Rico. But Washington, DC is by far the worst. The worst out of all of the states, and by a significant margin. It's like 1049 or something. Like, don't quote me on that. It'll be in the links. Whereas I think the next one down is like 800 by population. So it's a significant difference from other states. Washington, D.C. is a nasty, dangerous place compared to other states. So if you take D.C.'s per capita rate at face value, it puts it at about 1.05%. Basically meaning 1.05% of the population is actually affected by the violent crime, and the rest are not affected by the violent crime directly, direct effect. If we take that to the 10x measure, just like we did before, it puts us just a hair over 10%. which basically means you're 89%, you're almost 90% safe still. So even the worst, state, territory, whatever, the worst large geographical jurisdiction breakdown, according to the US, even if we take the 10x scenario, you are still far, far, far safer than you are in danger. That right there kind of kills the, I need this for self-defense argument, because, well, there's just not a lot of justification for that. But we mentioned a couple other factors, and these factors are important. Let's also consider some other factors as to what goes into violent crime, right? Number one, violent crime tends to happen with guys who are in their early 20s and late teens, right? So avoid groups of guys, 18 to 25 in low visibility situations in general, right? Just avoid suspicious looking people, right? And, as a man, it pains me to say that men are generally the perpetrators, but it's true. And the fact is that most of them are young men who have not even finished their prefrontal cortex formation. And so the fact is that, if it looks like trouble, smells like trouble, it might be trouble, just avoid it. Don't put yourself in a situation, right? And this goes to that situational awareness stuff, right? So you can avoid groups of people or even individuals that look dangerous, and thereby avoiding fighting. You can also avoid aggravating people, thereby avoiding fighting. One of the other things that we know is that cities are far more dangerous than urban areas. And metropolitan areas are more dangerous than suburban cities. So you can kind of judge things on where you live. And then, of course, within cities, like if you live there, what neighborhoods are kind of bad, or at least not for you, and what neighborhoods are fine, right? That's important. And then there's one more statistic that we need to look at here, and that this is important. Now, this kind of goes back to a DOJ report from 2012. I don't have any access to anything more recent, but they identified between like 1990 something and 2010, that was their analysis range, that 62% of violent crime happened by people, by victims and assailants who knew each other. Over half the violent crime happens between people who know each other, right? If you know somebody and you know their temperament and you know risk factors, try to do things that don't encourage them to act in a violent manner towards you, and you just cut those already minuscule numbers in half, right? If you know how to read a situation, if you know how to negotiate, if you know how to de-escalate, if you know how to manage your social graces in such a way that does not provoke people to act violently on you, then you can mitigate those numbers that are already tiny in half. So again, there's not a huge reason to train exclusively for self-defense. Now, of course, the risk is not zero. And if the risk is not zero, that means you should have some preparedness there. You should understand what your rights are. You should absolutely understand how to deal with improvised weapons, how to deal with everyday carry items that may aid you in a scenario. You definitely should know your phone numbers for aid or other contact information. You should definitely understand your situational awareness and demographic information that may clue you in. That does not mean be suspicious of people. It means be suspicious. It means be suspicious in very certain scenarios. And, you can mitigate so much of that. And so, yes, you should have tools in the toolbox. But honestly, when you're training martial arts, it is totally okay to do it because it's fun, because you enjoy it, because it's exercise that isn't boring, because you like the sport aspect and the camaraderie, because it's just a fun mental problem-solving game that gives you something tactile to do, because it helps you feel like your favorite superhero. Any of that is perfectly fine, right? Martial arts, by and large, is not self-defense. Martial arts is really just tactics for fighting, largely hand-to-hand in this day and age, but clearly weapons fighting, at least traditional weapons fighting, although I would absolutely include firearms training as part of martial arts. I would include archery as part of martial arts. We've had this discussion before on what actually qualifies as martial arts. Go back in the old videos. I'm not rehashing that here. But when most people say martial arts, most people are talking about going and learning hand-to-hand fighting or learning traditional weapons. And that is fine. And if you want to do that just because it makes you feel like Conan, great. That is more than enough reason. Doing it because you like to is plenty enough reason to go and do something. You don't need an extra justification. And you need to stop being paranoid. People are not as dangerous and nasty as you might think. And this is coming from a very antisocial person. But people are not as dangerous and nasty as you might think. And the fact is that honestly, training martial arts helps you with the confidence level to be able to see that better, because if you feel less like a victim, you will act less like a victim, and you will be able to read situations much more clearly. So that's all I've got to talk about today, and I will talk to you guys later. Good journey. Hey, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share, do all the other social media stuff. You can check out our other socials, as well as take a look at some of the merchandise that we have for offer in the links below. And if you happen to be in the Phoenix metro area, stop in, come in for a class, come in just to say hi. We'd love to meet you. Until next time, good journey.